Welcome to episode 114 of the Kaiju Network. Hello? 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 What happened? What happened here? Aw, man.
Are you there?
Yeah.
You really froze up there.
Well, you disappeared.
God, it's like ever since I started that previous live thing that we were going to start, it just completely screwed everything up.
This is weird.
I have no idea.
We're having technical. Well, anyways, sorry about all the technical difficulties. And to the person who gave us a thumbs down on that last link, fuck you, okay? You can't even rate us until you've seen a full episode yet, okay?
Right, we were just in the middle of things until crap just hit the fan on us.
Yeah, I don't know. This is why I hate technology, man. This is why I hate it. But anyways, this is episode 114 of the Kaiju Network podcast. I am your co-host, Kent, and with me is your other co-host,
Jason. How's it going, everyone?
And so this episode, we're going to be discussing 1959's The Manster, which is a co-produced Japanese film between the Americans and the Japanese. So that was a little redundant. But before we begin, and we didn't have time to really take care of any of this before we got on air because I had to put the kids down very quickly and I hadn't eaten. And I needed to talk to Jason about this, and we didn't have time. And so we're trying to get online here soon. And then, unfortunately, we had the technical difficulty problem. So then we were dealing with that. If you don't mind, we're going to quickly do a little bit of housekeeping here. So, Jason, because of some visitors I will be having here in under a month, I think as far as June episodes go, there might be one, if not two episodes that could end up getting postponed.
Okay.
So I got visitors coming the 27th, and I know our next podcast after the one on the 19th is going to be on the 2nd of June, so I will be busy. So let's see.
I mean that's totally fine because, you know, since we're kind of getting close to GFest 25 here, if we are able to do anything in June, that's totally fine by me. So we can kind of get things set up and ready.
Well, and then our episode after that is the 16th. I will be out of town. For that as well. So at least there are two podcasts there I will not be able to do. But something that I wanted to do, and I didn't realize it until today when I had made that tentative list of podcasts that we were going to do. I certainly hope you cut this part out of the audio version. Please, if you're watching this, you know, after we have already recorded it, just fast forward it like a few minutes here. I was when I made the tentative schedule, I didn't realize, you know, usually in the past we had taken like a month off after G-Fest. I personally don't want to do that anymore. I really would like for us to continue podcasting like shortly thereafter. So I was thinking like, for example, like if we have a podcast fall on that Saturday after we come back, from G-Fest, then I would like for us to continue podcasting. Then that podcast would be our post G-Fest discussion. And then after that one, 2 weeks later, then we get back to business as usual with the movies and all that. Cause I would like to kind of keep this ball.
Well, since we just recently picked back up from where we left off several months ago, where we kind of had that dry spell of not doing any podcasts, and then we kind of recently picked up, so I don't think there's really much of a problem with doing that.
Doing what?
Not taking a break after G-Fest.
Yeah, because I want to keep it going. Because yeah, I mean, we took a break off because I had Hope last year, and so obviously I was busy for quite a while. But I don't want to be doing a month long break anymore. I don't want to do that. I want to just keep it going.
Right.
So I don't have the list up here, but it probably doesn't matter because by the time the 16th rolls around anyway, we may already have an idea as far as potentially what G-Fest is going to be made up of. Maybe. Doesn't always happen that way. But yeah, but I want to keep the ball rolling. I want to give you the heads up on the June podcasts.
Yeah.
I will continue to stay in touch with you about that, but definitely like June 2nd will not be able to do. So yeah. So anyway, here we are. We're going to cover the Manster. I personally do not have anything else to discuss after we discuss the movie. Did you have anything else?
I originally didn't think I was going to discuss much of anything, but the past week or two, there is a new trailer that came out recently from Super Ride Productions on their upcoming new Ultraman series. And I just sent a link to you in the group chat, a link to the trailer for this new Ultraman series that's coming up. Um, Basically, what I'm guessing around the same time that the other ones have been coming out every year in early July. And this new series is titled Ultraman R/B. So, just from the looks of it, it's going to consist of two Ultramans this time, which from the past Ultraman shows, we've seen, a couple other Ultraman in certain TV shows, but apparently it seems like this time around they're going to have two main Ultraman guys this time throughout the entire show. So we'll touch upon that as soon as we're done with the Manster.
It reminded me of Pokemon because I think it's what Ultraman Red and Ultraman Blue, right? Hello? Wonderful. Wonderful. This just keeps getting better. Oh, man.
Oh, what the fuck? Shut the hell up.
To technology.
Seriously, fuck me.
We are live.
Not yet. Oh, we are.
Is this actually still the same thing? Oh, it is.
Yep, it sure is. I just saw it here on the YouTube page here.
Now I gotta post another thing on Facebook.
If this happens again, I don't even know what to do.
What this was supposed to fix our Skype problems. Now this is just as bad, if not worse, than Skype right now. Oh man, folks. We apologize for this, but at the same time, this is what happens when a corporation gets too powerful. Thanks a lot, Google.
Well, I don't know if it's just Google. It could be some kind of connection on one of our ends.
I don't think it is. I mean, I'm looking on my internet strength and signal here. It's full bars. Doing really well.
Well, I know I just had kind of thunderstorms and a little bit of rain going on, so I don't know if that affected it, but it's getting blue skies over here.
Yeah. Well, anyway, let's dive right in. Boy, dude, this is going to be a real shitty YouTube video, quite frankly. As far as the audio, I really hope you clip out a lot of what's taken place already.
God, that's going to be a crap ton.
Yeah. But anyway, let's just dive right into Manster. This is 1959's The Manster, and it's a co-produced film between the American and the Japanese. And here's a plot overview of The Manster. Larry Stanford, played by Peter Dinelli, is a news correspondent in Japan attempting to cover Dr. Suzuki's work on theoretical evolution. Dr. Suzuki experiments on Larry without his knowing, and Larry turns into a hideous two-headed monster who goes on a murderous rampage through Tokyo. He heads back to Dr. Suzuki's lab in the mountains and kills the doctor, and the second creature separates itself from Larry as a result of Dr. Suzuki injecting Larry with an enzyme, and Larry returns to normal, and he pushes the creature into a volcanic steam vent nearby, and then Larry is taken to the hospital as the movie concludes. Anyone who has been listening, even for like a year and a half, 2 years, just even for a short bit on our podcast, knows that this is a guilty pleasure of mine. This is
probably even longer than that.
Well, yeah, I mean, if my point in saying what I just said is that I love this movie so much, and there I go. I basically just kind of spoiled what I think about this movie, more or less. I've loved this movie so much that I mention it frequently on this podcast.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, one of the interesting things about this film is it's really short. I kept thinking it was an hour and a half film, and then I was looking.
That's kind of what I thought too. That was
I looked at the display on my Blu-ray, and it was a 72-minute runtime.
It's like I checked my time tracker on there. I was 20. There was 20 minutes left of it, so I was like, "Holy crap!"
Yeah, but it's a very short movie, but it feels like an hour and a half, and I'm not saying that's a bad thing. I mean,
it kind of does, though.
It does, and that's not a bad thing, because typically when people say, "Oh, this movie felt X amount of hours," they usually mean that in a bad way, meaning that the movie is sluggish and it slogs. No, this felt like it was an hour and a half in a good way, because there's so much jam-packed into this movie. But one of the great things about it being a 72-minute film, at least theoretically, is that there's a lot of action to it. Now, I understand that there's some shorter films out there in moviedom that are just about as short or even shorter than this, and they don't quite pack all the action in it, but it depends on what type of film it is too.
Mm-hmm.
But there is a lot of action. This movie basically gets going from the word go. You only really spend about 3 to 5 minutes just kind of hanging out before things begin to kind of gradually kick off. And there's some good setup, but there wasn't a lot of information on this film, at least in my research of this movie. There just isn't a lot out there. So, I mean, I did find some information, but the rest of what we're going to talk about really involves just kind of what we think of the movie, some things we like, some things we didn't like, etc. And just kind of the usual discussion that we typically have. Tetsu Nakamura, who is kind of, I think, the second or third build. Well, actually, no, he's the third build character, or actor, I should say, in this movie. Anyone who is familiar with Toho Kaiju / science fiction films should know this guy. This guy, he's not necessarily prominent in those films, but he typically is a scientist or just someone who is a very minor character. He may or may not have a speaking role in certain films. Some of them he does, but if he does, it's only a couple lines. And usually if there's some bad guys, he'll usually be a part of the bad guy group too, just because he kind of has that villainous look about him. Yeah, he usually, like, he's in the Mysterians, for example. And so if you look at the scene where Takashi Shimura and everyone else is observing this Mysterians Earth home base rising up from the ground, and you see this panned shot of all the Earth people standing there and watching this, this base come out from the ground. He is, I think, off to the left by a couple people. He's in the front row, but off to, I think, the left by a couple people. And so he's in that movie. He's in various other kaiju and Toho sci-fi films as well. So those of you who tune into this, of course, are obviously fans of Godzilla at the very least. So he's definitely in some of those earlier Godzilla films as well. So his English is very good. I remember when I first saw this movie almost 6 years ago now.
I was pretty surprised about that, and even the superintendent too,
Jerry Ito.
Yeah,
and again, anybody who follows Toho Kaiju films should be familiar. Who was he, folks? If you said he's Nelson from Mothra, you are correct, because he played that character. But the thing with Jerry Ito, I think he was, if I remember his biography, and I know we covered him at one point a number of years ago, if I remember correctly, I think he was actually born in the States and then moved to Japan when he was quite young, I think, if I remember. And no, he is not the brother of Yumi and Emi Ito, otherwise known as the Peanuts. He is not related to them in any way, shape, or form. At least he's not an immediate relative of theirs. The woman who plays Larry's wife in this movie, Jane Hilton, is actually Peter Dinelli's actual wife in real life. What's really peculiar about them is if you take a look at their own filmographies, their individual individual filmographies, and you take a look at their own sort of history, they were together in a lot of their shows and plays. So this was not unfamiliar territory for them to be playing alongside each other Mhm. For a project like this. And so that's always very curious. There were alternate titles for this movie. One title is called The Split, and the other one, as its official title in Japan, is called The Two-Headed Killer. Pretty generic, which is kind of interesting. You would think the Japanese would have something a little bit more interesting than that. Usually it's the Americans with the dull title. The Manster, as far as the American title, is very corny and hokey, but I think it's the better title out of the two.
Right.
The Manster, half man, half monster. And some of the posters here in the States are really funny with that. If you've seen the Japanese poster, it's pretty it's pretty neat. But
yeah, it's kind of like almost like a kaiju movie in a way. The way it's that poster was made.
yeah, it really is. I love it. I really do.
Yeah.
It's really unique.
Whereas during the time here in the States, they kind of tend to do more of that kind of the painted movie posters in a way. Whereas there in Japan, where they kind of do actual photography and kind of manipulate things here and there with placement and maybe a little bit of modifications. But yeah.
At least with a lot of the earlier posters, there were some that were artistic, but it seemed like, to my knowledge, yeah, most of the earlier Japanese posters were sort of photographed and edited and stylized. Speaking of The Split, there is a scene about midway through the movie where Dr. Suzuki is showing Tara this chart of kind of Larry and his sort of transformation into this two-headed creature. And if you notice in the upper right corner of this chart, it says Split, and it's in the exact same font that some of the posters at the time used to advertise. I had never caught that before, and this was the first time I caught that. I thought that was really unique, but at the same time, it made me wonder, well, this more than likely is a very cheap film. And so was this paper used to kind of storyboard the movie? And so they're like, well, we need Dr. Suzuki to have a chart in this. We can't really afford to go out and buy a big chart. Let's just use like our storyboard chart for this and just try to hide that part up there as best as we can and hope for the best. That's just a theory of mine, but I find that pretty funny and unique. Because I'm very positive that it has something to do with, I'm pretty sure that's the actual production sort of, I just forgot the word, sort of easel with poster board on it. I just lost the official name of it. But anyway, let's just dive right into the movie. I find it funny, and again, looking at it with more acute vision this time, because again, we're reviewing it and to try to give everyone a decent idea of what we think about the various aspects of these films. We try to look at them more closely than we would otherwise. I find it funny, and again, similar to that whole poster deal, I find it funny that I never caught it before, but the first Manster we see in the film, when the film opens up, Kenji, that we later find out like 5 minutes later is Dr. Robert Suzuki's brother. And by the way, Dr. Robert Suzuki is played by Tetsu Nakamura. He closes the pagoda door in order to murder the lady inside. I'm like, he's supposed to be a creature. Like he's unlike Peter Dinelli or Larry Stanford in this film, where Larry is still, pretty mostly man for the most part. This Kenji was a full-blooded beast, and it's just like, I find it funny that they closed it, but at the same time it's stylized for the production crew, so you could spray blood on there and then show the title card, The Manster.
Yeah, it's like when I came in here and sat on the couch while that was going, that was the first thing I saw. It's like, man, already.
Yeah, yeah. Um, you know what's goofy? And I never see a different route to it at any other point in the film. Um, I hope Dr. Robert Suzuki isn't planning to retire in that lab house of his, because it seems like you have to literally climb the side of a mountain to
Yeah.
get to it. There is no road, at least what they show. You have to literally climb, and it makes me wonder how in the world that place was built to begin with. And
Well,
again, I never caught it before and didn't think about it. And then this time I'm looking at it, I'm going, that's actually really terrible because
and
how they
I was
built.
just kind of thinking the same thing to myself, and I was saying to myself, probably behind the scenes, this guy really had a hard time trying to literally get up that steep cliff,
Well, and I wonder if that was
especially
intentional.
in those shoes.
Well, yeah, but I almost wonder if maybe by design, I think from a movie standpoint, it's supposed to signal that this is a really off the beaten path place. It's out in the middle of nowhere, and he's kind of this,
True.
secretive scientist. I think that's what we're supposed to get out of it. But still, as far as um, technical design, it's awful. It's really terrible, quite frankly.
It's like, um, when you going up with hardly any path of the like, how did you manage to get all of your equipment up there? I don't know, maybe by helicopter or something. That would probably be the only thing to do.
I don't know. There has to be a different route. It's just that we weren't shown in the film.
Right.
I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things about this film, though, and with a title like, The Two-Headed Killer or The Manster, you automatically know this is a pretty cheesy film. And so that means certain things like dialogue are going to be cheesy. However, I will say this. Not all the dialogue in this film is cheesy. You have some good actors
Mm-hmm.
in this film, and they can deliver pretty good dialogue. Not to mention, the thing is, though, you could still have good actors, but still really bad dialogue. There is some bad dialogue in this movie where it even makes some of these good actors look pretty ridiculous, but it's not as prevalent as you might think. And this is assuming you haven't seen the film before. And we get some of this goofy dialogue very early on in the film, where after the early credits roll, we see Dr. Suzuki climb up into his lab house. Tara is there. He wonders if Kenji has come back. Tara says he has. He goes downstairs. He takes a gun out from a desk nearby, and he sees Kenji, off in a different part of his lab. And he brings about some real goofy dialogue where it's more for the audience than it is for Suzuki himself and for Kenji, where he says that Kenji was his brother and he was a horrible experiment gone wrong. And then Kenji dies with one bullet, which is a little unrealistic. But again, it's an old movie where one bullet would kill anything.
And then he activated some kind of gas, which we aren't.
I think it's steam.
Explained.
I think that's steam.
I don't know. It could be, but for some reason, it kind of it seemed to really take a toll on Kenji there.
Well, hot steam. I mean, especially when you get a lot of it shooting out at you in your face like that. Yeah, it's gonna burn.
Well, it wasn't like straight on you. It was just kind of like a big poofy cloud that just kind of gradually just came down.
You know what's even goofier about that lab is that somehow he was able to get like this giant furnace in there or whatever. And because he's near a volcano, it almost makes me wonder if he's harnessing like some of the steam and the actual heat from the volcano.
I think that's kind of what he was luring to when he was talking to Larry, when Larry was talking to him there in his living quarters. It seemed like he was kind of harnessing kind of geothermal type of power, kind of like what you were alluding to, if it could have been steam that the doctor activated there before he shot Kenji. So that could possibly be the case.
Mm-hmm. And then Peter Donnelly shows up, or Larry Stanford. I need to just call them by their character names. And he starts talking to Dr. Suzuki, saying, you know, I'm a foreign correspondent. I want to cover you and your works here. The thing is, though, as the film goes on, I don't think we ever really learn why Dr. Suzuki is doing these experiments. All we know is that he's trying to do some sort of evolutionary work of sorts, and he experiments on his wife. She ends up being deformed. If you haven't seen this movie and you're trying to figure out, well, how deformed, well, in what way is she sort of deformed, think of her looking like Sloth from the Goonies, if you've seen that film. And then she's, you know, she still retains a lot of her humanity, but at the same time, there's sort of an animal side to her to some extent as well. Not as much as Kenji and later what will happen with Larry. But he experiments on his wife, although we learn from Suzuki at the end of the movie, or towards the end of it, I should say, that his wife volunteered for it, and that his brother also was okay with it. He came to his brother and he told his brother all the possible side effects that could happen with these experiments. And then, of course, he later turns into the Beast, his brother Kenji, and then he ends up obviously having to kill him, as we just mentioned. But we never figure out or are told, or we're never told or shown anything as far as why he's doing these experiments. Of course, this is a B movie, but that is sort of a flaw, nevertheless, with the story, is we're never told why he's doing this. It's just that he is and has been doing it for a while.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, that's something that is that's a pretty decent flaw here with the film. And speaking of Dr. Suzuki, while we're on him, didn't you find it a little weird where toward, you know, kind of the first half of the film, he plays the stereotypical scientist, right? Or like sci-fi scientist, where he's kind of the evil, the mad scientist. And he gets Larry drunk so that he can inject him with this serum, which will eventually turn Larry into a two-headed monster. And, you know, we see some weird glimpses from him in the first half of the movie when he and Larry are hanging out. And we're just kind of like, oh, this guy is really evil, and rightfully so, because he's trying to turn Larry into a monster. And, you know, he's not being kosher about how he's going about doing these experiments. And then towards the latter part of the film, when he talks about how his wife volunteered and Kenji agreed to be experimented on as well, that all of a sudden he becomes this sympathetic figure. And I don't know if that was intentional or not by the writers, if that was supposed to be sort of a reveal of sorts of his character, that, yeah, the first part of this movie he's going to seem evil, but we're going to kind of fool you audience members into thinking he is evil, but he really isn't.
I think it kind of it was kind of fully revealed that towards the end there, when Larry was about to come to his lab there, that it seemed like he was saying that with him not having the certain enzyme or something in one of his notes on the theories that he was doing, it seemed like it was a complete waste of time, that he was just probably going to stop doing it. So it seemed like he was, I think it was kind of somewhat alluring that he was trying to find certain ways to do what he was wanting to do, but just wasn't able to do it. And like what he was talking about, it's like where the god's angry at him, and then we see that one volcano started to explode.
Well, yeah, that's still towards the end, because that's the same area in which we learn, oh yeah, my wife did it and my brother was okay with it. I mean, I'm okay with sort of this fooling the audience thing. It's just how it's done in this particular film, because usually it's either a gradual reveal, as the movie progresses, that someone really isn't as bad as you think. And they don't usually play these characters outright evil. They may make them look mysterious, but usually not outright evil. And it's very strange how they had his character go about doing his experiment on Larry, and just how he observed Larry and was sort of manipulating Larry in the first part of the film. And then towards the end, we're supposed to be like, well, he didn't mean for this to happen. He's not trying to hurt Larry, et cetera, which is fine, but it would have been better if we had maybe hints of that or a gradual progression of that. Because what ends up happening in the middle of the part of the film is it ends up being about Larry being confronted by his wife and his friend at the news joint, Ian, and also him, meaning Larry, being chased by the police on several occasions in the same night, as well, before Larry heads back to Dr. Suzuki's lab. It's because Dr. Suzuki disappears in the middle part of this film, because it's all on Larry and his delivering carnage throughout Tokyo as he's murdering people. And so the way they handled this aspect of Dr. Suzuki, I think, it wasn't done the greatest, in my personal opinion.
Yeah.
Peter Dinelli. Anyone familiar with Thunderbirds should know Peter Dinelli. He does a voice on Thunderbirds, both the TV show and I think the 1 or 2 movies that they did based off of that show. And he gives wonderful performance in this movie. I think this guy, I had never heard of him or seen him prior to this film. And I've looked at his filmography, and outside of Thunderbirds, I had never heard of any of the other stuff he had done, nor seen any of that other stuff. And he does an awesome job in this film. And I think the first sign of that comes when he and Dr. Suzuki hang out with geishas, and he gets drunk. and he looks over at Dr. Suzuki and he starts saying something to the effect of, "Doc, a little thing in the West we like to call smooching. Tell her she smooches good." It's just, that's one of my favorite moments. I kid you not just in this movie, but in like every movie that I've seen. It's one of the greatest lines ever. And how it's delivered too. Tell her she smooches good. And he delivers it so well. I love Peter Dinelli. He does a wonderful job, and not only in the drunk scene, but also later on as the movie progresses, when he starts to gradually turn into this two-headed beast. He starts acting out against his wife and his friends, and he gets really upset, and it's very convincing, this anger, because normally, of course, you have any bad actor or actress in a similar situation, sometimes it comes off as fake, and a lot of times it's usually either due to the director and or the actor himself. No, he does a very good job. It's very convincing that he's very upset at these people when they come and start expressing their concerns about him to him.
I think it's not just Peter, but I think a lot of the cast members that were in this film, I think they did a fairly good job in their respective roles. I think they portrayed their characters pretty damn well, I would say.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree across the board. Most of the acting is either good and, if I may say so, even great. Any flaws, I would argue, lie with the writers and or the director. Like I said, there's some corny dialogue. You can't really blame the actors for that. Ian, unfortunately, the man who plays Ian, and the actor's name just escaped my mind. I want to say his last name was Holly. I don't remember his first name though. His character at the end is pretty goofy, I think, just because he's given some really bad dialogue. And I might as well just skip to that point in my notes here where his monologue to Linda Stanford is just really ridiculous, because he tells her that there's good and evil in Larry and that the evil took hold, and that through all of that, we probably can't understand what took place and why. And we simply need to see the good in everybody, which is a dumb line, because if you've watched the film, it's easy to understand why things happened the way that they did. There was no, I mean, there's good and evil in everybody, but in this situation, the evil in Larry came about because he was injected with some sort of serum that made him this evil monster that went on a murderous rampage. And yeah, we can understand why he was angry. Again, he had serum injected into him. He became this evil monster. That character sadly looks really stupid at the end of this movie because of that monologue that the screenplay writers wrote for him. It's unfortunate, because his character, like I said, looks really dumb in that particular moment. The music, there's some musical cues in this film that I really like, and it reminds me of typical sci-fi films and other.
Oh, and then kind of like when kind of the whole monster scene kind of kicks in, they'll bring in that one kind of quote unquote spooky music in there. It also reminds it also reminds me of the Golden Bat, which I'm probably guessing they use the same track to that.
Yeah, and you hear it in some other, I think even some Western science fiction films. The kind of it reminds me of UFOs, quite frankly. And then there's also, if you, and I only heard it in one moment in this film. It's this boing, boing, and
I think it's like some kind of like one of those saw kind of instruments that they use.
And if you've seen H-Man, that particular sound effect is played all throughout that movie. You remember that?
I think I might have.
Watch H-Man. It starts after the beginning credits are done. Immediately, that's the first thing you hear is boom.
It's been a while since since we both watched it, because we did a review on that a while ago.
Right, but I saw the H-Man last year though, so I've seen it fairly recently. But
well, yeah, you have time to watch a lot of these. But yeah, I'll have whenever I get around to it, or if GFS has it going one of these times, I'll definitely will have to catch it.
The effects in this film, despite it being a B film, are pretty good. I mean, they aren't necessarily spectacular, but they are really good. The volcano at the end looks good, but it does look a little fake. And
well, just kind of in the background when they show the doctor's lab, it seems a bit obvious that it's fake and everything. But yeah, the fix in it, I think most of it is practical. I think we see I think we see little to none of just like just the effects that they will just kind of draw into the film itself and the like.
Yeah.
So
yeah, it's all like puppets for that second head, which has like a moving upper lip, which is kind of funny. The puppet looks really goofy and the like, but at the same time, they tried because it had a upper lip that moved on occasion.
Well, and then the suit for the monster after the split. By the way, kind of that split scene was kind of pretty good, even though it was kind of obvious when they were behind the tree.
Yeah,
there
when they're behind the tree there. Yeah,
but the suit of the monster itself, when you see it up close, you can see that they were kind of trying their best. I'm not sure if that was kind of the actual kind of design that they were going for, especially kind of the facial structure of the monster, but it was a little bit goofy and cheesy.
It looked pathetic. It looked like a creature that was sad.
Yeah.
I will say this, the worst effect moment in this movie is right after that split occurs and Larry transforms back into himself. It's very careless transitioning. It's, of course, anybody familiar with old-timey films that did transitions, like The Wolfman, for example.
Yeah.
What they ended up doing was they took many shots, and what they would do in between those shots is obviously the makeup people would come in and gradually put more makeup and stuff on the actor, take a shot, go and put a little bit more makeup, take another shot, and then once it was all in one shot, it looked like this transformation. And they did it with Larry earlier in the film with his right hand, where he puts it down on the bar in his hotel room. And that scene always reminds me of a scene out of The Wolfman, where his hand gradually transforms, and it's done very well. Like, his hand doesn't really move that much from shot to shot. They did a very good job of really trying to keep it in place. But this final transformation where he goes from the beast back to himself here at the end of the film, it's very, very sloppy. You can tell what they took off just large chunks of the makeup. And I don't know if it was because maybe they were running out of time, if this was one of the final
that could be the reason.
Shots of the film, and they just were like, okay, we got to hurry up and wrap this up.
Or maybe it could have been an earlier shot, and they kind of did it, but then I don't know, there could have been some discussion about it, and maybe like the hand part could have been a later one. It could have gone either way on that.
Yeah. Nevertheless, though, regardless, it's a sloppy transition because Peter is, moving more from shot to shot in that film, and it's just not done well. I mean, you can tell it's not a proper transition. More shots needed to be taken in between the shots that were already taken in the film, and less makeup needed to be removed in between shots than what they actually pulled off. I would say, though, that is the worst effect shot of this entire film, but it only happens for like 5 seconds or whatever. I mean, it's very quick, but it's obviously very noticeable. But it is the worst effect shot of this film.
Well, then kind of the one part where he was kind of taking off his button shirt and you see part of the shoulder where it was kind of where you can kind of starting to grow something there, but you can obviously tell that there was like a little bit of kind of wrinkles and stuff on that skin kind of part where that eye was going to form later on in the movie.
Didn't look all that great either. It looked like basically they just took silly putty and slapped it on a portion of his shoulder.
Or just kind of like a thinly, maybe kind of like one of those flimsy kind of like rubber plastic thing, and just kind of slapped it on there and just maybe kind of glued it.
Yeah. Although I will say, though, when that eye does come out and we see it in a later shot, boy, does that actually look really good. I mean, it's still...
Although there's a little bit of wrinkles,
Yeah, the surrounding skin still leaves a lot to be desired, but the part involving both the lower and upper eyelid and then the actual eye itself, that is really good.
But then when he transforms, I forget... when he transforms in that psychiatrist
Dr. Jensen
office there, and then when when you see kind of that full on picture and when he's coming towards the camera, that was a pretty good shot.
It was. I mean, that particular moment in which that second head comes out, obviously most of that shot was in pitch black. And, you know, anyone who's familiar with old movie effects tricks and everything know why that was the way why that was shot the way it was, because, well, it kind of, you know, certain things, if you show light on it, it's going to look really bad. It's going to be very obvious that this thing looks like a puppet. And so, and then also because it's a horror film, you want it to be a little bit more spooky and mysterious as well. So it serves two purposes.
Well, then gotta have like lighting in certain areas.
Right. But more than anything else, I think it was to hide the fact that, yeah, at least in the process of bringing that second head up, it was either going to look really bad and or expose certain elements that helped make that head pop out from inside his jacket there.
Yeah.
Now, really, I mean, I'm just thinking off the top of my head very quickly, just zooming through all the films that we have covered up to this point on this podcast. And the only other film, at least that I can think of, just right off the top of my head, that I would also consider a film that is, you know, obviously not just science fiction, but pretty, you know, foot solid in the horror genre as well, is Gojira. I can't think of any other movie we've done where it you know, it could also be considered, you know, straight up horror as well. This film obviously is science fiction, but it's also horror. Is this a film where at any point where you've seen it, and I don't know how many times you've seen it, I've seen it, gosh, probably like a dozen times over the last 6 years, or technically 4, because I bought the DVD of it back in 2014. Is there any point in which you have seen this that you yourself either, I don't want to say get horrified, because let's face it, this is a very cheesy B type of film, but is this a film where you think anyways, where if put in the certain situation that you could see this to be maybe even a chilling type of horror film?
Boy, that's kind of a tough one. It's what you were kind of talking about, if it's like sci-fi or horror, just kind of the overall atmosphere, just from watching the movie, I see it more kind of as a horror film in a way, even though there's maybe a little bit of sci-fi elements scattered around in the movie that were in there, but I see it more as a horror film, where it's just kind of like, mainly when we see a lot of the horror films nowadays, it's you're kind of mutate. They kind of mutate the kind of the human aspects in a way to where it's just kind of unrecognizable in a way, and whereas sci-fi is kind of more kind of the spacey, or, you know, giant monsters, or maybe some other sort of situation, or with aliens and all that.
Starman.
Yeah. To me, horror is kind of more like kind of a human, maybe kind of like disfigured, or maybe like maybe just kind of like a giant animal or something attacking humans or something like that. So I would kind of place it more as a horror film more than a science fiction kind of film.
Right. But my question was, do you think if you were in a particular situation, let's say it was really dark out, or it's dark and stormy night, and you were to watch this film, do you think you could be chilled by it?
No, absolutely not.
You don't think you could?
No. With these kinds of movies, like from back in the 40s or 50s, or in the 60s, I probably wouldn't really get scared as much. But when it comes to maybe like somewhere in the 70s and 80s, with them having good visual effects, and probably the 90s and all that, when like certain effects kind of tend to be a little bit more real, and then adding more kind of camera angles or cinematography aspects in there, then those kinds of movies tend to be scarier if you try to watch those at night. But when it comes to movies like this, from the 50s or 40s or earlier, doesn't scare me one bit.
For me, I mean, I don't get scared with a lot of these older films either, but I do get chills sometimes if I'm in the right environment. Like, I'm reminded of 2 Christmases ago when I was going through my Twilight Zone series. That was the second time I had gone through the Twilight Zone series in like a year. And I was in season 5. I was approaching the end of the entire series. And there was an episode, I want to say it's called like The Call or something of that sort. And it involves this older woman. And anyone who is not familiar with Twilight Zone, all 5 seasons are shot in black and white. And this particular episode, more or less, just to kind of to generalize it, it involves this woman, this old woman who's basically out in the middle of nowhere in this very small house. And she's sort of a bitch, basically. But her phone keeps ringing, but she'll pick it up and no one's on the other end. And then it keeps doing this over a period of like a couple weeks, and it starts driving her crazy. And then the phone starts ringing during the night when she's sleeping. And, she'll pick it up and no one's there. And it just keep calling. And then eventually gets to a point where she picks it up and she starts hearing a voice going, oh. And then she's so creeped out, like she hangs up. Mm-hmm. And it rings again, like 2 seconds later after she hangs up. Hello? And like all of a sudden she starts like losing her mind. Well, then she finds out towards the end of the episode. I think it's her daughter, maybe, or a close friend. They go to the local cemetery, and this ending to the episode is kind of hokey, but at the same time, it's a little creepy as well. They find this grave of her old boyfriend back when she was young. She was driving this car and something happened where she got into an accident. Her boyfriend was the passenger, slammed into a tree, killed her boyfriend. And they found his burial plot there in the local cemetery. But what they also find is there was a telephone cable running all the way into his grave. Huh. So it was the dead boyfriend, like calling her and like trying to speak to her. And
the one thing I'm trying to figure out is why is the phone cable going all the way down to that burial plot?
You're not supposed to think about that.
I am thinking about it now.
Yeah, I know, but you're not supposed to. But my point in all that is that that creeps me out even during the daytime. But when I watched that particular episode 2 years ago, I watched it during the evening, and that creeped me out even more. And I've said this before, I think, on this podcast. I love black and white films because when you don't have color, that means you have more darkness in the picture. And so when it comes to things like horror and sci-fi films in particular, I like that because it gives you at least a little bit of the creeps and the chills. And that's what happens to me. I have seen a number of the Universal horror monster films in the dark, and it's just the only light that I have in the room is the movie being projected from the TV. And I don't get scared, but I get some chills occasionally because you know, like I said, there's no color. It's just black, white, and gray. And so there's more eeriness, there's more creepiness. And also because of how those movies back in the day were made too, they were made to look more creepy. Like in The Wolfman, when he's going through the forest, the trees are more jagged and gnarled. There's really no leaves on those trees. And there's all this fog on the ground. And you can only see pretty well, like maybe 20, 30 feet in front of you before the fog kind of distorts what you're able to see in front of you. It was a combination of no color and how they went about making those films back in the day. And for me, this film is no different. I could see myself, and I haven't done this, but I could see myself getting the chills in a couple of scenes. There are a couple moments in this film which I truly do believe, if I were to watch it in the dark, would probably creep me out a little bit. One of those scenes involves when Larry starts to really feel the effects of the serum, and he goes to this Buddhist temple, and he's basically asking this lone Buddhist monk to help him. The Buddhist monk more or less ignores him. And so it looks like Larry's getting ready to leave, and he just kind of looks up at the statue, and the statue's got this really evil, wacky looking look on its face. And then all of a sudden, Larry turns around. He just, gets this evil look on his face. He walks off. Then the camera pans up to that really evil looking statue again. Mm-hmm. And then the music rises, and then it stops abruptly. And then you hear, and then the scene fades. And then there's another moment a little bit later where Larry is in an alley, and he comes across a gal, and he just basically grabs her, takes her off around the corner, and you hear her scream as well. I could see moments where I could get the chills in this movie if I were to watch it in basically a dark room.
But yeah, I don't tend to get any chills or any of that sort of thing when it comes to these older movies.
I can get creeped out in certain moments, and it depends on what the movie is. Like if I'm, like, for example, though, if I were to watch though, like Godzilla Raids again, I'm not gonna get even creeped out or anything like that. There's nothing in that movie at any point that seems even remotely creepy or chilling. But something like, let's say, I'm just trying to think of all black and white films off the top of my head that I've seen. Like that Twilight Zone episode. Something like that, where there are definite moments where I'm like, this is actually quite weird and creepy. I could see moments like that where, yeah, I'm getting a little creeped out. I don't get scared with something like that, but I get creeped out from it if done properly. Again, I've been hogging the conversation here for like the 114th consecutive episode.
Well, it's like I've been trying to talk and everything, but then you just kind of keep on going. So it's like might as well just kind of let him get it off of his back. So,
well, what are some things that you enjoy about this film? Actually, no. Let's hold on to that thought. Let's get the bad part out of the way first. What are some things you don't like about this film?
Well, we kind of touch upon certain elements of the special effects part. Those were some of the things that I didn't particularly like in the film. I think there was one certain thing that kind of had in my mind for a while. As far as like, it didn't, I'm not sure they didn't really explain. I'm kind of going blank here. Like, what is the, what was kind of the goal that he was trying to go for? Well, like what kind of evolution what he was trying to go for? Like, what was he trying to look for?
Well, that
in a
was
way.
something I brought up earlier. Yeah, is why is he doing it?
Yeah, it seemed like they just kind of left it out, kind of left it out, and just kind of let you decide. But that. I think that was kind of somewhat of a mistake. It just kind of probably kind of confused a lot of people that have seen the movie, and also probably another thing is that they probably didn't. I don't know if I didn't quite catch it, but it seemed like they didn't tell us kind of the effects of this certain serum that Dr. Suzuki injected Larry into the neck
I
part
think
there.
I think that particular thing that was obvious. Yeah, turn him
Yeah.
into this
Well,
two-headed monster.
it showed him just kind of like the certain effects physically, rage and the certain things. But it would have been nice if they possibly kind of touched upon maybe other things. I don't know. It would have. Um, I I think um, I can't think of anything much off the top of my head right now. I mean, it's my first showing of it. I was kind of more interested on how things kind of went in a way. I just there there were certain things that were obvious to point out, but it's probably going to have to take me maybe a few more viewings on certain things that I didn't like about the movie. But I think with this first viewing, I think it was kind of more of did it entertain me in the
Mhm.
sort of sense. So yeah, with those um, highlights that I have that I didn't really like, I'm probably guessing there's going to be more that I won't like in future viewings of it. So with that, that's all I can think of for the time being.
Yeah. And when I bring that question up, I'm not trying to say, okay, you need to have a laundry list. If there's nothing that you don't like about the film, that's good. I'm not saying you have to have like a bunch, and I'm not encouraging you to try to,
Well, just
you know,
FYI.
to try to find, a bunch of flaws that turn you off from the film. For me personally, because like I said, I'm a huge, fan of this film. I would rather have you fall in love with this film like I do, because I do think it is a fun film. I don't think it's a great film, but I think it's a fun film. But personally, this movie obviously is flawed. I mean, it's a B movie. It's obviously, cheap. But at the same time, though, too, it tries to do a lot of things right. And I think by and large, it either succeeds in few cases or it comes close.
I do have one thing. All of a sudden, just kind of right in the middle of the film, and then towards the end, you don't really see the doctor. It just seemed
Oh
like he
yeah.
just kind of dropped off the radar. That's the other thing I didn't really like.
Yeah, I think that hurt his character because, like I was talking about earlier, it's weird because in terms of the evolution of the Doctor character, or at least how the audience is supposed to feel about him,
Mhm.
in the first half of the movie, he's basically portrayed as your stereotypical mad scientist. But then in the latter half, when he reveals, oh, Emiko was his wife, and obviously we found out in the first part of the movie, Kenji was his brother. He wasn't this evil scientist where he basically grabbed him by the scruff of the neck and was like, no, you will do this, and jabbed him with
Right.
serum. He basically was saying, no, they more or less volunteered to do this, and they knew the possible side effects that would come about these. Um, that is an issue I have with the film. And I will say there are a number of issues I have with the film too. Like Dr. Suzuki's character arc, I think is really weird. It either is done poorly or it was done in a way that they intentionally wanted you to feel that way about the character. But because, like we already discussed, he's gone from the middle half of the movie, we're not given enough time to see that gradual evolution
Mm.
of his character. He starts off in in one particular spectrum of the character arc, and then the next time he appears in the film, boom, it's a quick change. There's no it's like here you have point A, point B, there's a gap here, and instead of building a bridge to gradually make it from A to B, he just like Superman jumps.
Yeah, it also kind of felt like a different movie in the second half a little bit, whereas you had the superintendent and then the other police force going after him. It just kind of felt like a different movie in the second half, kind of like Death Kappa.
It becomes a police chase film.
Not as obvious switch over like Death Kappa, but just kind of felt like it just kind of somewhat switched over to a second movie or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, this is better than Death Kappa, but
obviously by a million miles.
But I will admit to this: as much as I am a fan of this film, there have only been a couple of times in which I've really paid attention to the movie from beginning to end. And a lot of the other times in which I've watched this movie, to be perfectly honest, I kind of zone out of the latter half of the movie up until the point Larry makes his way back to Suzuki's lab. Otherwise, a lot of that chasing stuff, like I said, only a couple times I've actually seen in its entirety. Otherwise, I just zone out because, in my personal opinion, the most interesting part of this movie is that first half with Larry hanging out with Dr. Suzuki and then later Tara, where he's starting to basically show that he's cheating on his wife, kind of having an affair, and he's having a good time, and he's gradually changing. And then once he becomes the two-headed monster, oddly enough, you would think, okay, well, now this is where the movie gets good. Like I said, I do kind of zone out, but the couple times that I've seen it, with everything in between, including with this viewing, with the police chase, it is pretty exciting. But I will say, though, too, the chasing scene is all on foot, and there's not a whole lot of variation from scene to scene. It's not like he has some fisticuff struggles on occasion with some of the police officers. It would have been great, like, for example, if what they could have done in one of those chases is have him like get surrounded by the cops, and like they try to like tackle him or something like that to restrain him, and then he just like throws him off and like slashes at him or something like that. He, during those chase scenes, kills a couple of the cops, but it's one-on-one type of stuff. It's, you know,
yeah.
They could have handled that, but more or less those chase scenes, yeah, it's just him running and then the cops following. There's not a lot of actual.
Yeah, it's
oh man, we just lost the feed again. There's not a lot of stuff going on that makes it all that interesting. And I know you went out, but I'm continuing the conversation. Just
okay.
Just but there's
making sure.
There's not a lot of variation, and the chasing. And the more I've thought about it, the more I realized, yeah, that whole chasing scene is supposed to be entertaining, but it really isn't, because there's nothing truly unique about it, because he doesn't really challenge the cops or anything like that. Mm-hmm. For me, though, the biggest flaw of this film, and the one that I sort of cringe at on occasion when the moments come up, it's not so much the effects. I can kind of forgive them. The chase scene is a little dull after a bit, but it's something I can also kind of forgive too, to a certain extent. But the thing that really gets me are the moments of bad dialogue. Like I was saying earlier, when Tetsu Nakamura delivers the line to Kenji, "You were my brother, you were an experiment that went wrong." And then there are a couple other moments in the peppered in the film. And then, of course, Ian's monologue at the end of the film talking about there was good and evil in there, and we just weren't meant to understand. It's just, that to me is probably the worst of it, because it really is a really dumb line. But that to me is really the biggest flaw, are the moments of bad dialogue. Fortunately, though, as I mentioned earlier in this discussion, it doesn't happen that often, but it's one of those things where when it does happen, it happens like a ton of bricks falling. Like, it's very obvious and apparent that it's taking place.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what are things you liked about the film?
The cast members, I think they did a really good job. As mentioned earlier, I think you were kind of talking about Peter, being like one of the good cast members, doing a really good job in his role. But it's not only him, but it's the rest of the cast members that were in this film that did a really good job. Even though they kind of had kind of a flawed story to work with, they still managed to pull off with what they had in their hand, or what they had available to them. And that's the one thing that I like. Another thing was the settings to the film. I think the settings to the film, I think, kind of did. I think it was really good, kind of a good setup for the entire film, and like certain areas of the film, like the kind of the cemetery, the Dr. Suzuki's laboratory slash estate, kind of in the mountain area. Although, well, then kind of the mountain itself, kind of right at the end of the film, there were, I would say, maybe certain areas that didn't fit quite well. I forget. One of the other ones, it's not the temple. The temple one was pretty good. Also, I'm probably guessing like the hotel room or some of that. It seemed like a good bit of it was kind of held at. But yeah, I would say mainly the cast members is kind of what made the movie, even though, like you said, there's quite a few flaws with the film, with the story, and certain elements, visual effects here and there. I would say the characters is kind of what made this film here.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think the cast is a real strong point to this film. Also, as we discussed a little bit earlier, I think the musical score to this film is good too. It's not great, but I think it's good. I think it services the film pretty well. And then I think the effects, by and large, are good, even though there are a couple of moments where they suffer just a little bit. But by and large, I think those are pretty good too. However, I will say this. I think the absolute best thing about this movie, and it's elusive obvious, meaning that it's so obvious we miss it. And I didn't realize it until I was thinking about it after I watched it yesterday, and then all throughout the day today before we recorded here. The thing that I love most about this movie is that the people, not just in front of the camera, but behind the camera, took this movie seriously, and maybe even too serious to a fault, because this movie, due to moments of bad dialogue and sort of iffy effects work in certain shots, the movie becomes unintentionally funny in spots. But this movie was supposed to be played straight, despite the absurdity of its plot. And I love the fact that everybody involved with this project was dedicated to making this wacky, goofy type of film and to make it work, to try to make it the horror film that they wanted it to be. And that's the thing that I really love most about this film, is that everybody was dedicated. And before I even forget, I want to say that, you know, going back to cast, people like Peter Dinelli and his wife Jane Hilton, and even people like Tatsu Nakamura and everyone else who is involved in front of the camera for this film. It's unfortunate that I think not a whole lot of these people got the sort of recognition that they deserve. Now, granted, I understand, like for Peter Dinelli, like I said, outside of Thunderbirds, in which you only hear his voice, I haven't actually seen him in other works personally, but I think he does such a good job here that it's too bad that he didn't get the recognition that he deserves, even for a film like this. And there's such a stigma, and I'm going to get on my soapbox here for a brief moment. There's such a stigma with certain genre of films. If you're doing something that's science fiction nowadays, you can kind of get some recognition for that because nerd culture obviously is pretty prominent in our society right now. But back in the day, sci-fi was looked upon as very lowbrow type of movie making. Same thing with horror. You know, action films even today are kind of considered lowbrow. You know, stuff like that. And the fact that there are a lot of people in these genre films and even B pictures such as this, there are people who do such a good job either in front and or behind the camera that they don't get the recognition because they just happen to be making either a B movie or they're making a genre film that at the time is considered to be a genre that is not tasteful. Due to the sort of, I don't know, the elite gatekeepers or whatever, like the Academy of Motion Pictures here in the States, for example. You know, when you have these sort of gatekeepers who just snub their noses down on certain stuff like that. And a person like Peter Dinelli, just at the very least for this particular role, I think did an exceptional job and should have gotten a lot of recognition and props for just even this one role at the very least. Like I said, I don't know much about his other stuff, but he did a wonderful job here. And we as a society and just even a community of people, especially now with the internet and social media, need to really try to bring these people front and center, to really push for people to not only see these movies and to see the evidence for themselves. Like, it would be like me going on to our Facebook page and being like, seriously, you need to watch The Manster. Yes, it sounds hokey, and in many ways it is, but you got to watch it because not only do I think you're going to find it entertaining, but you're going to like this guy, Peter Dinelli, and you're going to like his wife, Jane Hilton, et cetera, because they put on good performances here, and they're really trying their hardest to make this film at least, you know, good and really an acceptable piece of horror film, even though, yes, again, it's still considered lowbrow type of filmmaking. We need to, as a community, band together instead of having these really stupid, you know, everyday run-of-the-mill social media battles like, well, I think you're stupid because you like such and such, and, you know, my opinion matters more. We need to band together and, like, really push for things like, you know, for example, the cast in this film and even the crew in this film as well, because they really tried. And I know some people, there's already some people I can think of off the top of my head immediately, where if I showed them this film, they would be laughing and be like, that's one of the goofiest, if not dumbest things I've ever seen. But they're missing the point in that this was a labor of love by a lot of people. And they wanted to do a good job. And they were not only wanting to do a good job because they knew that they needed to get work down the road, and so they knew other people were going to watch these films and judge them as far as like, okay, are you good enough to be in our movie? They also believed in these projects. A lot of actors, and there are exceptions, especially back in the old days where, especially in Japan, you had actors who were under contract by the studios. Right. I don't know if it was that way in the States or not. It might have been, but I'm not sure. Don't quote me on that.
I don't think they were.
Yeah, I'm not sure either. Oddly enough, I don't know as much about, old-timey American filmmaking as I do Japanese. Go figure. Shows you where my interest lie. And I'm a huge fan of classic American science fiction and horror films from like the 20s on up to the 60s. I mean, it's odd I don't know more about that, but people here do a good job because they do it out of a labor of love. If Peter Dinelli didn't think he believed in the project, he wouldn't have done it. Well, some may be saying, look, maybe he wasn't getting enough work and he needed something to help pay the bills. Well, you know what? That could be true. But even then, if that was the case, a lot of these actors tend to phone it in with some of these roles, and they don't care. Russ Tamblyn for War of the Gargantuas, anyone? I think everybody who's ever seen that film knows that he's one of, sadly, the weak points of that film. And Russ even admitted years later he wished he had put more effort into his role in that film, because he realized, wow, there's a large group of people who not only love these types of films, but even that movie in particular. Peter Dinelli, was one of those guys who, with this film, even though it was co-produced by both American and Japanese studios, gave it his all. And so did the other cast members, his wife, the guy who played his best friend, Ian, and then, of course, you had the girl played Tara, and then Tetsu Nakamura. They all gave it their best, despite the fact, flawed script, and the dialogue in some moments was really hokey. But they believed in it, and they gave it the best that they could, given with what they had. And so they did a hell of a good job, I think, with this. And that, I think, is the best thing about this film, is that everybody involved with it, in front and behind the camera, believed in this, and they wanted to try to do the best that they could with the limited budget that they have, and probably even limited shooting schedule as well. And I think they did a pretty darn good job with that. So in my personal opinion, that is the best thing about this movie, is that everybody really believed in the project, and they did the best that they could to really try to make this a good, fun picture.
Mm-hmm. Should we get into the conclusion of the review?
Sure, you go ahead.
Well, of course, with some of the things that I liked, what I mentioned about it, it's one of the strong points of the film, the cast members, and then the settings. Although certain settings like the shipyard, it just didn't really fit in with the film pretty well. There's just kind of certain things in there, like the visual effects, like Ken has been mentioning, the story / the script, some of the dialogue just didn't fit in, or it was, I shouldn't say fit in, I would say flawed, or like, as Kent said, hokey. The cast members, I think, really made the strong points of it. And then, of course, there were some visual effects in there that looked pretty good. There were some moments in that film where it kind of made me chuckle a bit, especially in the graveyard, where Larry just kind of throws up the rock and then hits the guy, and then he just kind of, and then the cop just was just taken aback by the rock, and then you just hear the type of thing.
And it's obvious it's foam.
Yeah, you can definitely tell the way that it was thrown, and then the guy, the cop, whoever's betraying one of the cops there trying to catch it, you can obviously tell it's a foam thing. But yeah, there were some certain things in that film that just kind of made me chuckle in there. But just with the the lighting, the camera angles, certain elements of there which I can't really think of right now, just really kind of set the tone / mood for this film, especially with some of the lighting in certain areas, kind of where Larry was revealed in his kind of transformed state with the head kind of off to his what was it, the right, to his right, I think. Just with a lot of the darkness, and then light kind of shined in certain areas just to kind of reveal like certain aspects of his transformation. I think they did a really good job with a lot of the lighting and camera angles when it comes to these scenes. It's a really kind of like what you did with your monologue there. The camera people or the crew behind the cameras there, I think they really did a good job and tried their very best trying to make a good film, even though they didn't do good enough job with the story to it, but the cast members to it did their very best, and it was a strong point of the film. So with the Manster, I will give it a buy. Not a definite buy, but I will give it a buy. It would be kind of a movie to watch. I would say once in a while. Maybe unlike Kent here, probably would watch it every freaking day here, but
No, not every day. No, not every day.
But I would give it a buy.
That's kind of surprising. I really thought you were probably going to go slightly into the Rent area. And again,
it's kind of close to Rent, but I would give it at least a buy.
Yeah, and with me again, if you've been paying attention to the podcast for even just the last couple of years, you know how much in love I am with this film. I mentioned it numerous times on this podcast, and I gave it away too at the start of this podcast after all the many stupid technical difficulties we've been having here.
Tell me about it.
But which I need to stop doing. I'm realizing like almost every episode I'm basically giving away what I think about a particular film. But The Manster is an incredibly wacky and goofy movie, and it can be unintentionally funny with some of its antics and dialogue, and just maybe it takes itself a little too seriously. Nevertheless, the movie is a nice mixture of horror and science fiction that makes you feel at home in the land of the rising sun. And the movie definitely has a lot of charm to it, and it does remind me of such films as The H-Man and The Human Vapor. The film has a bare bones plot that doesn't have great characterization, but it does have some good acting in it. And what's more important, though, is it's a lot of fun. It was made with such a great, as much great care as a budget could afford. And you could tell the cast and crew were all in despite its inherent goofiness. And the movie moves at a brisk pace, which is to be expected given its short runtime, and there is quite a bit of action and suspense throughout. The movie isn't scary, but it's one where if you watch it in the dark, may give you some chills in a few spots like we had discussed earlier. And look, my bottom line with a lot of films really for many years has always been, do I have fun with it? Does it entertain me? And The Manster is a fun film that I think fans of either Japanese or American sci-fi horror should check out. I guarantee that many of you will have a great time with this film by either going along with its inherent silliness and sort of sci-fi horror charm, or you may have fun poking fun at it. But it's a definite buy. I do think if you are at all familiar with, even the H-Man alone. I know the Human Vapor hasn't really been officially released here in the States, But if you've seen even at least the H-Man, in many ways it reminds me of that. The H-Man, though, is a slower paced film. It is longer. It's longer by, like, I don't know, 15 minutes or so than this film. But it's also slower paced. The action isn't as brisk as it is here in terms of its actual execution. Um, but at the same time, I still think I do love a movie like The H-Man because it's kind of haunting in certain respects, especially the ghost ship part.
Mhm.
But with this particular movie, I have more fun with this movie than I do The H-Man. And The Manster is such a goofy, wacky film in terms of just its inherent um, its inherent plot that you and yet it's played straight by and large. And I do have a lot of fun with it, and especially as I've gotten older, um, I have found myself going back to more of the classic um, horror and science fiction films. When I had my resurgence in my kaiju fandom in very late 2011 and then definitely in the early part of 2012, I found myself falling in love with some of the Showa Godzilla films that before I had never cared for. Um, I've explained on here before, Ghidorah the Three-Headed Monster was one of those films. Ghidorah the Three-Headed Monster, prior to that, for me, though, was a film that I always considered to be not just one of the biggest disappointments I had ever seen, but a film that was so cheap and just ridiculous that I'm like, that's not even worth my time.
Mhm.
And yeah, I mean, that film was rushed. It was produced and released in the same year as Mothra versus Godzilla. And it shows in many cases that, yeah, it was a rush production. But as I got older and as I just kind of naturally matured and gradually began to kind of slow myself down and thought and all that, and to really just kind of do more research on things and to really try to be sympathetic a little bit more as far as what some people are doing with some of these projects, I began to see more of the charm in them. And as a result, I Ghidorah the Three-Headed Monster is one of my favorite Showa Godzilla films. I will always freely admit that the film is deeply flawed. There are a lot of problems with it, but I walk away from it and I will always say, yeah, it is a flawed film, but you know what? It's a lot of fun, and that's the reason why I like it. The Manster is in the same league as Ghidorah, in my opinion. It's a deeply flawed film. It's too bad there wasn't a bigger budget. Probably didn't have a long shooting period either. Um, it would have been great if it had a bigger budget, more time to shoot. But nevertheless, with the final product that we're given, it's a fun film.
Mhm.
I always have fun with this movie. The 12 or however many times I've actually seen it in the last nearly 4 years, I've always had fun with it. I know I said earlier I kind of zone out of that chase scene a lot of times, but that doesn't mean that I find the film as a whole not entertaining because I always come back to it towards the end. And if I didn't care for it, I wouldn't be watching it as often as I do. I watch this movie 2 or 3 times a year. I mean, that's how much I enjoy this film. And I watch this movie more than some of the other movies I really enjoy, like The Dark Knight, for example. And I love that movie. So that tells you how much fun I have with a film like this. In today's day and age, and I don't know if it's just me, and I really think this is true, we're going through a period similar to the 1970s in which over the last 15, 20 years, I think most American films have gotten really sort of too serious and maybe even gritty, in my opinion. And it's gotten to the point I can't take that stuff anymore.
Mhm.
Uh, Again, as I've gotten older, you know, I'm becoming. I sound like a grandparent or something now, but like as I've gotten older, I can't take that stuff anymore. Like part of it too is that the violence in some of these films has gotten too real for me, and it's gotten to the point where a lot of that violence I can't stop. Like there was a brief episode of Grey's Anatomy that we briefly watched, um, like a month and a half ago when my in-laws were in town because my mother-in-law likes that show, and there was a scene of open heart surgery, and I'm like, oh, I can't do that. Whereas if I was a kid, I'd be like, oh, that's awesome. But back then, though, too, on TV, that stuff either wasn't shown or it was, but it was either brief and it kind of looked, fake. Whereas now the stuff looks too real and things get too gritty. There are a lot of unhappy endings to a lot of stories anymore in today's film. And even if there are happy endings to some of these stories, there's so much carnage and chaos that happened throughout the film that even though maybe evil or whatever is defeated at the end, so much has been lost that it's not a true happy ending. That maybe our hero is battered and bruised and has lost a lot in his life, and therefore it's not a happy ending. This is a typical film of its time. It's, and I'm okay with that. As I've gotten older, I cling more to these older films because, as I've said, it seems like so many films anymore are too serious, too much centered in terms of their themes and their tone, like that of the real world, which is very scary right now. It's very dark. It's very uncertain. And I like to escape. Give me a movie where there's giant monsters, but something to where it's not going to be like uber serious and trying to bring in really real world stuff. I mean, Gojira does that, but it's from World War II over 70 years ago. I'm not saying that its tone and its theme doesn't have a serious place and shouldn't be seriously considered. I'm not saying that, but because obviously I'm a Westerner, I don't live in that country that got affected by 2 atomic bombs, but also we are removed enough from it that we can sort of kind of breathe a sigh of relief and be like, okay, we aren't having to deal with this devastation as well. But a film like Godzilla vs. Megalon, really goofy, campy, ridiculous, but I love it because it's so lighthearted, it's so fun. It gets me away from the real world, which is so just corrupt and ridiculous anymore that I get depressed when I follow the news anymore. It's just, I'm like, I literally will cry sometimes just because it's so much. And I'm like, I need something to escape. And these types of films do that. And The Manster does that for me. The Manster is goofy, and ridiculous, and it deals with sort of something that maybe even today could be a real deal done behind closed doors, like evolutionary biology or whatever, where you're trying to change people's genetics and turn them into creatures or whatever. Hell, Jurassic Park in some sense deals with that. But it's done in such a way that is so entertaining and so goofy. It's like, yeah, like this, I know this is fake and all that, and I can have fun with it. You have to give The Manster a watch. I am so happy we finally covered it because it's been a long time coming. I know I brought it up many times. I'm like, we got to do The Manster. We got to do The Manster. We almost came close to doing a commentary with a couple of friends of ours like a year and a half or two ago. Because I'm just like, I love this movie so much. It's ridiculous, but man, is it a lot of fun. And I really suggest, even if you've either heard this movie but never saw it, or you just have never heard of it at all, you need to check it out. You have to check it out. I think you will have a lot of fun with it. And it was recently released on a Blu-ray like in the last 5, 6, 7 months from Shout Factory. You can find it on Amazon or even at shoutfactory.com. Check it out. You got a great transfer in the Blu-ray. I also own the Alpha Video DVD. The Alpha Video DVD is actually pretty good, but it's the regular. Oh shoot, I forgot. Was it the
transfer of the video quality isn't that particularly great because I've come up front with the Alpha Video brand, and I didn't really care much for the video quality.
Well, the aspect ratio, was it 4:6 is what it's called, or what is it called?
Yeah, it's a 4:6 standard.
Yeah, like, you know, I personally think, yes, the Alpha Video compared to the Blu-ray is not as good, but I think the Alpha Video one still is pretty good, in my personal opinion. But I would still highly recommend the Blu-ray. But it's out there, it's available. You can find this film, and it's worth every penny. I think I really do. This is a fun movie. I know I've been ranting and rambling here for an awfully long time, but it's me basically pleading with you to just give this movie a shot if you haven't seen it already, because it's so much fun. It's goofy, it's ridiculous, and you know, it like I said, it's not a good movie. It really isn't, but it's so much fun, and that's what should matter. Is you have fun with your films, and I have fun with this movie every time I put it in, and I never regret watching it. This has been one of my most treasured kaiju type of purchases, that I was influenced by G-Fest. If I had never gone to G-Fest, I never would have heard about this film probably. Or if I did, it would be years down the road. And I probably would be reluctant because I'd be like, the Manster, that sounds really goofy and kind of ridiculous. But it's a fun film. You have to try it.
Well, then, since I don't really have anything except for talking a little bit about the upcoming Ultraman TV show, which is from what I'm guessing here coming out in a couple months around the same time frame like the others that have. I'm not sure if you had the time to see a little bit of the trailer that I sent you a link to a little while ago before we had these stupid technical difficulties.
No, because stupid technical difficulties have ruined, they've distracted me.
But I'm probably guessing you're a little bit familiar with how things go in the Ultraman series. I'm probably guessing maybe a little bit with some of the newer ones and how they've been kind of going as far as the formula.
No, I don't.
I know we've at least have seen more than just one Ultraman, especially kind of more recent. It's like, it seems a lot of them will, if you see a new Ultraman series, they'll tend to at least have one of the kind of the earlier Ultraman in there, and then at least another one from the previous Ultraman TV show. And they'll kind of collaborate them with those kinds of Ultraman, and then sometimes they'll at least kind of have another original Ultraman, but kind of have them more as a rogue, kind of a rogue Ultraman. But this time around, it seems like they're kind of taking one of those formulas of having two Ultraman, but having them as the main characters in it this time, kind of the two main Ultraman characters, pretty much throughout the entire show, whereas you'll have them kind of as a one-off or have them in certain episodes throughout the entire TV show, but have them throughout the entire show. And from what I've seen in this TV trailer, I'm probably guessing, like I mentioned before with the previous two, that they've kind of had the story not based within kind of a certain agency that we've seen with a lot of the Ultraman TV shows. I'm probably guessing, based on this trailer, that they're probably going to go back to having the story go be in the agency, some kind of agency. I'm not sure if they really delved into what this agency name is, if it's going to go to that route. But that's probably my guess, is that they're going to have two guys within this agency that will somehow get the Ultraman powers or something like that. But that's probably how it's going to go. And then they'll probably have maybe one half has certain kinds of powers, and then the other has the other half. And then maybe probably like their finisher or something that they'll kind of merge both the Ultraman as one. That's probably my guess. But just by looking at the trailer, I think it's going to be another interesting TV show in the Ultraman franchise. But yeah, I think you should definitely check out the trailer whenever you get the chance. I know I put a link up on our Facebook page, and then some of the like Twitter, and I'm probably guessing Minds and something like that. I'll probably will add a link in the description box down below the video. So I think other than that, it's Ultraman RB. It's relatively coming out soon. So I'm probably guessing with the previous, I think 3 have come out onto Crunchyroll and Verve. I probably won't be surprised, or should I say, there's probably a 90% chance of it seeing this TV show again online.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not familiar with a lot of the more recent Ultraman stuff.
I mean, you can at least watch it for free on Crunchyroll, but you'll be getting the commercials and everything.
Oh well, I really want to check out a lot of the newer ones, but I've seen a few of the newer ones, like at G-Fest and stuff, and they don't seem to entertain me as much as the older ones. Again, I have a soft spot for a lot of those older ones, again, just because of the goofiness and the charm that those have. And I'm not saying the newer ones don't have charm. It's just that, again, as times change and the effects sometimes move more towards computer stuff and just societies change and all that, things become even more serious in some respects too. Sometimes things seem too real, and I thought in some cases with some of the newer Ultraman stuff that was kind of true. And so that's not to say I'll never see them. I think I will. It's just going to be down the road quite a ways. But
I would say at least maybe try to check this one out, especially when I come over to your place within a couple months, because I'm at least hoping, like, I think it was Ultraman Orb. It came out right around one of the days when I was at your place a couple of years ago. And I'm kind of certainly hoping to come out kind of right around that time when I come to your place in a couple of months. And if that does, we'll definitely have to watch it together.
Oh, I remember when Ultraman X was the big thing coming out. Whatever, is that thing done now?
Oh yeah, that was before Ultraman Orb a few years ago.
I'd see. It seems like every year there's literally a new one, and it's like
that's basically the case. Because one year it was Ultraman X, the other was Ultraman Orb, and then just recently it was Ultraman Geed last year.
And see, like if I were to ever get those like on DVD, it would fill up probably more than that shelf I have back there.
But yeah, they tend to start kind of right around early July, and then I think they finish up probably around Thanksgiving or probably middle of December.
Yeah. I'm hoping though. I mean, the last official like Ultraman release that I'm aware of that we got here in the States was 7, and that was like what, 2011, 2012. I mean, that was a while ago, and it's just.
And then I know that Shout Factory kind of did I think it was a 4-day marathon on Twitch TV of Ultraman Leo.
Yeah, I saw that. I saw it advertised. But yeah, I started Ultraman Leo late last year. I only got through the first episode though. Um, but yeah, there's a lot. Like I'm going through the older ones first because, like I said, I like those. Plus, I know there's some continuity as you go through a lot of those earlier ones too. But yeah, I know someday I'll check them out, but it's not going to be anytime soon.
Yeah.
But with that, um, thank you to Jason and myself for watching this live on YouTube. And again, it was due to technical difficulties and a new link, which unfortunately anybody who probably was watching that first feed, probably didn't see the new link on our social media page. But again, for those of you who are watching and listening after the fact, thank you so much for staying tuned in. With episode 115, which will be coming up in 2 weeks, we are doing Warning from Space. And basically after that, we more than likely are not going to have 2 more episodes. We will have those postponed. Originally, we were going to cover like Golden Bat, and I think we were going to dive right back into Godzilla with the Heisei, with Return of Godzilla. But because of scheduling issues on my end, that's not going to happen.
So you can probably say it's a good chance that the episode after Warning from Space will be G-Fest.
And that would be late June with that particular episode. In fact, actually, yeah, it would be June 30th. The last day of June would be the next podcast we will do after Warning from Space.
Yeah, and speaking of which, as far as G-Fest goes, when I sent them the money to, for the early bird special, every year I get an email about it. I think maybe like a few days afterwards, but for some reason I haven't gotten an email.
I would shoot him another email, double check.
That's kind of what I was planning on doing sometime this month.
Well, do it right now, like when we get done here. So then that way we have things covered, because in case there's something wrong, we can fix it.
Yeah.
So yeah, like get on that, like when we get done here. But do you have Warning from Space? Well, no, it was what, Amazon or some place?
Yeah, Amazon Prime.
Yeah. So, because what we'll do here is you watch then that one, because it'll be the alpha video in English dub. I have the Japanese cut. And so I'll watch the Japanese cut of the movie, and then basically when we cover episode 115 and we cover that film, yeah, more or less we're covering the same thing. However, I think my cut's a little bit longer than yours, so we'll get the full effect of both the English dub and the original Japanese cut of that film. It's a very interesting film. It gets a little dull in a couple spots, but it's very interesting. It seems really wacky and hokey, but really after I saw it the first time here, again, like I think 3-4 years ago.
Don't give it away.
I'm not. But I was actually quite surprised at how serious it actually was. And it's an interesting film in a good way. I think, again, that's another film should check out, just because it's different. But we'll be discussing that here in a couple of weeks. But once again, thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you in a couple of weeks when we discuss Warning from Space.
All right. Check you guys later.